A single drive is definitely all that it takes. One moment, everything is normal. The next minute, the world is in shock. From rising stars to global icons, some celebrity car crashes didn't just make headlines. They left permanent scars on Hollywood and beyond. These are the crashes that stunned the world and changed everything overnight. Paul Walker. That afternoon's sun was still high over Southern California, and the powerful engine of a silver sports car roared to life. And behind the wheel was Paul Walker, a man who had built an entire movie legacy around speed, racing, and fearless driving. For millions of fans around the world, he was the face of the Fast and Furious series. Calm, confident, that street racer who always seemed to survive the most impossible crashes on screen. But on November 30th, 2013, reality delivered a cruel twist that honestly felt like something straight out of a tragic movie script. Earlier that day had started in the most ordinary and cheerful way imaginable. Paul spent that morning with his family, just relaxing, including his daughter Meadow and his mother. They were talking about Christmas decorations, casually deciding when to go out and buy a tree. It was one of those quiet, simple family moments, the kind celebrities don't really get often, the kind you don't think twice about. Then a message came in, reminding him about an event he needed to attend. It was organized by his charity group, Reach Out Worldwide, a nonprofit he had created to help communities after natural disasters. So Paul got ready and headed out to the charity gathering, which was being held at a performance car shop in Santa Clarita. And honestly, the atmosphere there was very relaxed. Among the vehicles parked at the event was a sleek and extremely powerful supercar, the Porsche Carrera GT. This machine was famous among car enthusiasts for its breathtaking speed and its reputation as a car that demanded serious skill to control. Paul's friend Roger Rodas, a professional driver and financial advisor who helped manage Paul's finances, owned the vehicle. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, the event was winding down. Paul and Roger decided to take the Porsche out for a short drive. It was supposed to be a quick spin around the block before returning to the shop. It wasn't supposed to be anything dramatic, just two friends enjoying one of the fastest cars in the world. The Porsche slowed down a suburban road lined with trees and streetlights. Witnesses later described the car moving incredibly fast. Investigators would later estimate that it was traveling somewhere between 80 and 100 miles per hour. For a few seconds, everything seemed normal. You would not believe what happened next. The driver suddenly lost control. The Porsche hit a curb, spun violently, and crashed into a tree and a light pole before striking another tree. The impact was devastating. Within seconds, the car erupted into flames. People from the charity event heard the explosion and ran toward the crash site. Smoke filled the air as the bright orange flames swallowed the wreckage. Friends and spectators tried desperately to get closer, hoping they could pull the two men from the burning car, but the heat and fire made it impossible. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but by then the tragedy had already unfolded. Both Paul Walker and Roger Rodas were pronounced dead at the scene. The world would soon learn that the beloved actor had died from severe traumatic injuries combined with burns. The news spread across the internet with incredible speed. Fans struggled to believe it. A star famous for surviving spectacular movie car crashes had died in a real one. Production of Furious 7 was halted while filmmakers decided how to complete the movie without one of its central stars. Eventually, Paul's brothers stepped in to help finish his remaining scenes using digital effects. The finished film ended with an emotional tribute that left millions of viewers in tears. Flowers, candles, and handwritten messages soon covered the crash site in Santa Clarita. It became a memorial visited by fans from around the world who wanted to say goodbye to the man who had made them fall in love with cars, racing, and loyalty between friends. It's hard to process a loss like that. But sadly, this wasn't the first time the world had seen something like it. James Dean. Long before Hollywood produced modern action stars and global franchises, another legendary figure had already captured the imagination of young audiences everywhere. His name was James Dean, and he embodied youthful rebellion like no one else. By 1955, the young actor had become one of the most talked about stars in the film industry. His intense acting style and mysterious personality fascinated directors and audiences alike. Films like East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause had turned him into a cultural icon almost overnight. But outside the movie studio, James Dean had another obsession. He loved racing cars. Eventually, he acquired a lightweight racing machine known as the Porsche 550 Spider. Dean nicknamed the car Little Bastard, a playful name that would later become part of Hollywood legend. On September 30th, 1955, James planned to drive the Porsche to a racing event in Salinas, California. He was accompanied by his mechanic, Rolf Wutherich. At first, the plan was to transport the car using a trailer, but Dean decided he wanted to gain more experience driving it on the road. The journey began in Hollywood and headed north through California highways. Along the way, the actor even received a speeding ticket for driving 65 miles per hour in a 55 zone. It seemed like a minor inconvenience at the time, something a famous actor could easily laugh about. As evening approached, Dean continued along a highway intersection in Central California. At nearly the same moment, a college student named Donald Turnipseed was driving his own vehicle toward the same junction. Turnipseed attempted to make a left turn across the highway. The Porsche and the Ford sedan suddenly found themselves directly in each other's path. Dean tried to react instantly, attempting a maneuver that experienced racers sometimes use to avoid a collision. But there was not enough time. The vehicles slammed into each other in a violent head-on crash. The lightweight racing car was thrown into the air and landed in a ditch beside the road. James Dean had suffered catastrophic injuries, including a broken neck and crushed limbs. His passenger survived with serious fractures. Dean was rushed to a nearby hospital, but doctors could not save him. He was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. He was only 24 years old. The tragedy stunned Hollywood. His film, Rebel Without a Cause, had not yet been released. When the movie finally reached theaters weeks later, audiences saw a haunting performance from a star who was already gone. James Dean instantly became a symbol of youthful rebellion frozen forever in time. His career had lasted only a few years, but the impact of his work still echoes through popular culture decades later. James Dean's death felt like a warning that came too late. But years before Hollywood even saw that tragedy, the music world had already lost one of its most powerful voices in a crash just as devastating. Bessie Smith. That was Bessie Smith, widely known as the Empress of the Blues. Her singing carried raw emotion that touched listeners deeply. In the 1920s, she became one of the most successful recording artists in America, selling huge numbers of records for Columbia Records. Her voice filled theaters and dance halls across the country. But by the 1930s, the Great Depression had weakened the music business. Large concert tours became less common, and many performers relied on smaller club shows to survive financially. Bessie often traveled long distances between cities for these performances. One night in September 1937, she and her partner Richard Morgan were driving along a dark highway between Memphis and Clarksdale. The road stretched quietly through rural farmland with very little traffic in the early morning hours. Richard was behind the wheel when they approached a slow-moving truck ahead of them. He attempted to pass it, but misjudged the distance and speed. The car struck the truck in a violent side collision that tore apart much of the vehicle. Bessie suffered devastating injuries. Witnesses later described her arm as being almost completely severed during the crash. She was critically wounded and bleeding heavily while lying beside the road. A doctor who happened to arrive at the scene attempted to stabilize her while waiting for an ambulance. Eventually, she was transported to a nearby hospital, but the injuries were simply too severe. The legendary singer died later that morning. The loss of Bessie Smith marked the end of one of the most powerful voices of the blues era. Thousands attended her funeral. Yet for many years, her grave remained unmarked until fans and fellow musicians finally raised money to place a proper headstone in her honor. That loss shook the entire music industry to its core. But this next story? It didn't just shake fans, it shook an entire nation. Grace Kelly. This one involves a woman whose life seemed pulled straight from a fairy tale. Before she became royalty, she was already famous in Hollywood. Her name was Grace Kelly. Grace had built a remarkable acting career during the 1950s. Her elegant beauty and calm confidence made her one of the most admired actresses of her time. Then, in September 1982, a routine drive turned into a nightmare. Grace and her teenage daughter, Princess Stephanie, were traveling down a winding mountain road along the French Riviera. The narrow route twisted through steep hills and sharp turns as it descended toward Monaco. At some point during the drive, Grace suffered what doctors later described as a stroke. The sudden medical emergency caused her to lose control of the vehicle. The car missed a curve and plunged down the mountainside. It rolled through trees and rocks before finally coming to rest far below the road. Princess Stephanie survived with relatively minor injuries, but Grace Kelly was critically wounded and fell into a coma after being taken to a hospital. Doctors worked tirelessly to save her, yet the damage to her brain proved too severe. The following day, she passed away. The world reacted with shock and sadness. A Hollywood star who had become a real-life princess had died in a tragic accident that felt painfully random. Her funeral in Monaco drew world leaders, celebrities, and grieving admirers who remembered both her film career and her royal service. A global icon was gone in an instant. And as unbelievable as that sounds, the next crash was even more disturbing. Jayne Mansfield. It happened during the summer of 1967, and the circumstances were so shocking that rumors continued to circulate for decades afterward. The victim was actress Jayne Mansfield. Jayne had become famous during the 1950s as one of Hollywood's most glamorous blonde stars. Her bold personality and playful publicity stunts constantly kept her in the headlines. She competed for attention in an industry that already had other famous blonde icons like Marilyn Monroe. Although her film career had slowed during the 1960s, Jayne still traveled frequently to perform in nightclubs and television appearances across the United States. On June 29, 1967, she was traveling overnight from Mississippi to Louisiana after completing a performance. Inside the car were Jayne, her boyfriend Sam Brody, their driver Ronnie Harrison, and several of her young children sleeping in the back seat. The highway ahead was covered with thick fog drifting from nearby marshland. Visibility became worse when a mosquito control truck released clouds of insecticide spray into the humid night air. The Buick Electra carrying the group approached a slow-moving tractor trailer on the road ahead. Because of the fog and chemical mist, the driver did not notice the truck until it was far too late. The car bumped into the back of the trailer at high speed. The impact was so catastrophic, the top of the vehicle was crushed as it slid under the trailer. The 3 adults sitting in the front seats were killed instantly. Miraculously, the children in the back survived with injuries but remained alive. Photographs from the crash circulated widely in newspapers, leading to disturbing rumors that Jayne Mansfield had been decapitated during the accident. Later medical reports clarified that this rumor was false, although the injuries had been extremely severe. The tragedy led to a major change in road safety regulations. Authorities later required large trucks to install protective steel bars beneath trailers to prevent cars from sliding underneath them during collisions. Those safety devices eventually became known informally as Mansfield bars, a reminder of the accident that inspired the rule. And just like that, everything changes. Which one of these stories shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments, I'll be reading. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around because there are always more stories you haven't heard yet.